I was walking back from the mailbox when my neighbor suddenly rushed toward me. His voice was sharp and urgent as he said, "Don't open your package." At first, I laughed, thinking he was being dramatic. But then he turned the box in my hands and showed me the label. My heart sank. 10 minutes later, the police had sealed off our entire street. Before I tell you what happened that day, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because this is a story you will not forget. My name is Lila, and I was 21 when this happened. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon in our quiet neighborhood. The sun was shining, kids were riding their bikes up and down the street, and sprinklers clicked on across the lawns. I remember being barefoot, walking down our driveway with my phone in one hand and humming to myself. I had no idea anything unusual was about to happen. I stopped at the mailbox, pulled out the stack of envelopes, and felt the weight of a small brown package at the bottom. It was heavier than usual, and the return address looked strange, but I brushed it off. I assumed it was something my dad ordered online, or maybe a book my mom had been waiting for. As I headed back toward the house, my younger brother Ben called out from the porch, "Bring my game, Lila. Mom said it's in the mail." His voice was playful, full of hope. I laughed and shook my head. "Don't get too excited. It's probably just socks for Dad." My mom Grace was inside cooking dinner, and my dad Mark was in the garage fixing something on his workbench. Everything about the evening felt normal. That's why, when my neighbor Mr. Carter suddenly came across the street with urgency in his eyes, I didn't understand at first. He wasn't the type to joke around or scare people for fun. A retired firefighter, he had always been calm, steady, and protective of everyone in the neighborhood. He stopped me halfway up the driveway, his hand lifting toward the package. "Don't open that," he said firmly. His tone made me freeze. I laughed nervously and asked, "What are you talking about?" "It's just a delivery." But he shook his head, his expression serious. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a joke. Something was wrong, and I was holding it in my hands. Mr. Carter's hand hovered over the package like it was dangerous to even touch. His eyes, usually calm and kind, were sharp with concern. "Lila," he said, lowering his voice, "this doesn't look right." I frowned, clutching the box a little tighter. "What do you mean?" "It's just a package. We get deliveries all the time." He shook his head and pointed at the label. "Look closer. The handwriting is uneven, almost like someone scribbled your name. And see this?" His finger tapped the corner where the return address should have been printed. Instead, it was written out by hand in smudged ink from a city hours away. I leaned in, and my stomach tightened. He was right. Every delivery we'd ever received had a printed label, neat and clear. This one looked rushed, almost sloppy. "Maybe it's from a small business," I said weakly, trying to convince myself more than him. Mr. Carter's jaw tensed. "I've seen enough strange packages in my career to know when something feels off. You need to take this seriously." My laugh died in my throat. His voice carried the weight of experience, and the more I stared at the box, the heavier it felt in my hands. Just then, my mom Grace stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on out here?" she called, noticing Mr. Carter's serious face. I swallowed hard and held up the box. "He says something's wrong with this package." She frowned, stepping closer. Mr. Carter handed her the box carefully, like it was fragile. Mom's face paled when she saw the label. "This isn't our address," she whispered. "Look, our street is spelled wrong, and this isn't our zip code." The realization hit me like a punch. Not only was the label sloppy, it wasn't even accurate. "But it still has my name," I said, pointing at the scrawled letters. "Someone sent this to me." Mom's eyes flicked to Mr. Carter, and I could see the fear behind her calm expression. "Where's your dad?" Before I could answer, Dad walked out of the garage with grease on his hands. "What's all the fuss about?" he asked casually. Mom held out the package to him. "Look at this, Mark. Something isn't right." Dad glanced at the label, frowning. "It's probably just a mistake. People send stuff all the time with messy handwriting." He shrugged, trying to sound calm. "It's nothing to get worked up about." But Mr. Carter wasn't letting it go. He stepped closer, his voice firm. "Mark, listen to me. I've seen packages like this before. Some were harmless, but a few weren't. The weight, the handwritten label, the wrong address. It's suspicious. You need to call this in before anyone opens it." The tension thickened. My brother Ben, who had been listening from the porch, whispered, "What if it's a bomb?" His words made my chest tighten, and Mom quickly hushed him, pulling him close. But the look on her face betrayed her fear. Dad ran a hand through his hair, torn between disbelief and concern. "I don't want to overreact. What if it really is just a mix-up?" Mom's voice rose, sharper than usual. "And what if it isn't? What if Lila had opened this inside the house?" The image made me shiver. I imagined setting the box on our kitchen counter, grabbing scissors, and slicing through the tape. The thought of what might be inside made my stomach turn. Finally, Dad's expression softened. He looked at me, then at Ben clinging to Mom's side, and sighed. "All right, we'll call it in." Better safe than sorry, Mom immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was steady but urgent as she explained the situation. A suspicious package delivered to our house with my name on it, but an incorrect address and return information. The operator instructed her to place the box carefully on the ground away from the house and wait for authorities to arrive. I set the package down in the middle of the lawn, my hands trembling. It looked so ordinary sitting there on the grass, yet it held the power to terrify us all. The seconds stretched as we stood at the end of the driveway, watching it like it might move on its own. Neighbors began to notice. Curtains twitched, and 2 kids on bikes slowed to a stop, staring. Mr. Carter crossed his arms, staying close to us. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. But the fear only grew. What if it wasn't just a mistake? What if someone had written my name on purpose? My mind spun with questions I didn't want answers to. Who would send something dangerous to me? And why? The air grew tense and still. Then, faintly in the distance, I heard the wail of sirens. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the heavy silence that had settled over the neighborhood. I stood frozen at the end of our driveway, staring at the box lying in the grass. It looked so harmless, an ordinary brown package with crooked handwriting on the front, yet every instinct in me screamed to keep my distance. When the first police cruiser pulled onto the street, lights flashing, neighbors began to spill out of their houses. Some stood on porches, others gathered in small groups across the road, whispering and pointing toward the package. I could see the confusion and fear ripple through the block. My brother Ben tugged on my sleeve, his eyes wide. "Are they really here for our house?" Mom pulled him close, her hand on his shoulder. "It's just a precaution," she said softly, but her voice lacked the usual calm that comforted him. I knew she was just as scared as I was. 2 officers approached us quickly, their radios crackling. One of them, a tall woman with a calm but authoritative tone, asked, "Is this the package in question?" Dad gestured toward the box. "Yes. My daughter picked it up from the mailbox. The label is wrong, and our neighbor noticed something suspicious." The officer nodded. "You did the right thing calling. We'll need everyone to stay back while we wait for the bomb squad to assess it." The words bomb squad made my stomach drop. Hearing them out loud made everything feel 10 times more real. This wasn't just a silly misunderstanding. This could be life or death. Another police car arrived, and officers began blocking off the ends of the street with bright yellow tape. They went door to door, instructing families to stay inside or step back into their yards. Within minutes, the familiar, friendly street where we rode bikes and hosted barbecues looked like a crime scene. Red and blue lights bounced off windows, radios buzzed, and the package sat in the center of it all like a ticking question no one wanted to answer. Mr. Carter stood beside us, arms folded, his eyes fixed on the box. "You see?" he murmured to my dad. "It's better to be cautious than sorry." Dad gave a small nod, his face pale. For the first time, I could see fear in his expression. It scared me almost as much as the package. My dad was usually the calm one, the one who brushed off worries and told us everything would be fine. Seeing him shaken made me realize just how serious this was. The bomb squad vehicle pulled up next. Officers in heavy protective gear stepped out, their movements precise and deliberate. They carried equipment I didn't recognize. Scanners, robotic devices, thick gloves. Watching them unload felt surreal, like something from a news report, except it was happening on our lawn. An officer in charge approached us and asked for details. Mom handed over the note she had written while on the phone with 911, describing the label and the incorrect address. I added, "It was heavy for its size, and my name was written on it, but not in anyone's handwriting I know." He nodded gravely. "We'll take it from here. Please stay back." We retreated to the porch, huddled together as the bomb squad set up. They sent out a small robot with a camera attached, rolling it slowly toward the package. The quiet hum of its wheels filled the air as everyone held their breath. The robot circled the box, tilting its camera to examine the seams and the label. Then, one of the technicians stepped forward carefully, holding a long tool that allowed him to probe the edges without getting too close. Ben squeezed my hand. "What if it really goes off?" His voice was trembling. I looked at him, forcing myself to sound stronger than I felt. "That's why they're here. They know what to do." The minutes dragged on like hours. Every small movement the technicians made felt monumental. I could hear neighbors behind us whispering, some gasping when the robot nudged the package slightly. My heart thudded painfully, my breath shallow. Finally, one of the officers turned toward the group of police and gave a signal. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could see the tension in their faces. The police immediately pushed everyone farther back. The street was now fully sealed, and an officer walked over to us. "We're moving into the next phase," he explained. "We can't confirm yet what's inside, but it's not safe to assume it's harmless. We'll attempt a controlled opening. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real danger. Dad wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me closer. Mom kept her hand on Ben's back, whispering prayers under her breath. Mr. Carter stood like a sentry beside us, his jaw set, his eyes never leaving the package. I looked around at the neighborhood, the flashing lights, the nervous faces, peeking from windows, the officers working with quiet urgency, and realized how quickly life had shifted. 10 minutes earlier, I had been barefoot in the sun, carrying mail. Now, I was watching a bomb squad dismantle something addressed to me. The moment the technician kneeled down beside the box, tools in hand, my chest tightened. I held my breath, waiting, hoping, terrified of what would happen next. The technician crouched low beside the package, moving slowly and carefully, as though the slightest mistake could set it off. The entire street was silent. No laughter, no car engines, no chatter, just the distant hum of cicadas and the low buzz of radios from the officers. I gripped the porch railing so tightly my knuckles ached. Through the haze of flashing red and blue lights, I saw the technician position a long, claw-like tool over the box. He nudged one corner, then another, testing for resistance. A muffled click came through his headset as he relayed instructions back to the team. Every tiny movement felt monumental, like watching the final seconds of a countdown. "Step farther back, please," one of the officers instructed. He guided us closer to the house, making sure we were shielded by the porch pillars. My brother Ben buried his face into Mom's side, and she wrapped both arms around him, whispering that everything would be okay. Dad stood rigid, his eyes locked on the box, his lips pressed into a hard line. The technician finally pierced the tape sealing the box. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My heart hammered in my chest as I imagined what could be inside. Wires, explosives, something deadly. The officer lifted the flap with his tool, slowly revealing the contents. From our distance, I couldn't see at first, but the change in the bomb squad's posture told me it was serious. One technician immediately stepped forward with a scanner, waving it over the open box. Another crouched beside him, muttering something into his radio. Then came the words, "I'll never forget." It's a device. Crude, but active. The air seemed to leave my lungs. My mom gasped and pulled Ben tighter against her. Dad muttered under his breath, "Dear God." Even Mr. Carter, who had been steady as a rock, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I felt my knees weaken. It was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a prank. I had been carrying a homemade bomb in my arms, joking about it being socks for Dad or a video game for Ben. My stomach churned at the thought of what could have happened if I'd walked straight into the house and set it on the kitchen table. The bomb squad worked swiftly. They placed the device into a protective container, sealing it with practiced precision. One officer barked orders, and others cleared the area, ensuring no one was within range. I watched in numb disbelief as they carried the container back toward their vehicle. Then, the lead officer turned to the group of neighbors clustered at the edges of the tape. His voice was firm, cutting through the night. The package contained an improvised explosive device. "It has been secured. No one is in immediate danger." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors pulled their kids closer. Others shook their heads in disbelief. I caught sight of Mrs. Jensen from across the street crossing herself and whispering a prayer. The officer walked over to us specifically. "This package was addressed to you?" he asked, looking at me. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, it had my name written on it." He exchanged a glance with another officer before speaking again. "We'll need to ask you some questions. This wasn't random. Someone intended for you to open that." The words hit harder than anything else. Not random. It wasn't just bad luck or a mistake. Someone had written my name, chosen our house, and tried to send death in a cardboard box. My mom's hand tightened on my shoulder, grounding me as my mind spun. Dad's voice was strained. "Do you know who could have done this?" The officer shook his head. "Not yet, but the handwriting and return address will be analyzed. For now, you need to be extremely cautious with any future deliveries. If you don't recognize the sender, don't touch it. Call us immediately." I stared down the street at the flashing lights, the yellow tape, the neighbors whispering in shock, and felt like I was living in someone else's life. Just an hour earlier, I had been carefree, enjoying the summer evening. Now I was at the center of a crime scene, my name written on a bomb. Mr. Carter placed a steady hand on my dad's shoulder. "You see why I stopped her," he said quietly. "I had a bad feeling. If she had carried that inside." His voice trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. We all knew what could have happened. My mom turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "You're safe because he spoke up, and because you listened. Promise me you'll always trust your gut after this." I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't speak, not with the image of that box burned into my memory. As the police packed up their equipment and began dismantling the barricades, I realized this night had changed everything. Safety wasn't something I could take for granted anymore. Something as ordinary as a trip to the mailbox had almost ended in disaster. And the most terrifying part was knowing that somewhere, someone had wanted that box in my hands. The police cars left just before midnight, their flashing lights fading down the street until the neighborhood was quiet again. But the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It was heavy, tense, filled with the memory of what had just happened. I sat on the porch with my family, staring at the patch of grass where the package had been. Nothing was left there now, but the image of it burned in my mind like a scar. Inside the house, everything felt different too. The living room, usually warm and inviting, seemed smaller, as if the walls themselves knew how close we had come to disaster. My mom moved through the house, locking every door and window, double-checking them like her life depended on it. My dad paced the kitchen, his face pale, replaying the moment over and over. Ben sat on the couch clutching his favorite blanket, asking questions no one could answer. Why would someone send that to us? Why would they write Lila's name? I didn't know what to tell him. The truth was, I had been asking myself the same questions since the officer's words echoed in my ears. This wasn't random. That thought haunted me more than anything else. Someone, somewhere, had deliberately written my name on that label. Someone wanted me to open it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. The rustle of leaves, a car driving past, even the neighbor's dog barking. My heart raced at each noise. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how fragile life really is. A cardboard box, something I had carried 1,000 times without thought, had nearly changed everything. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. Neighbors who had watched from behind curtains or stood on their lawns now came by to check on us. Mrs. Jensen hugged me tightly and said, "God was watching over you last night." Mr. Carter, the man who had stopped me at the mailbox, came over with his wife. He didn't say much, just looked at me with steady eyes and said, "I'm glad you listened." Those words carried weight. I realized then that if I had brushed him off, if I had rolled my eyes and walked inside, this story would have ended very differently. Over the next few days, the police came back with more questions. They confirmed the package was a homemade explosive, crudely built, but dangerous enough to cause serious harm. They asked if I had enemies, if I had argued with anyone online, or if I had been targeted before. I felt shaken by their questions, because I didn't think of myself as someone who had enemies. I was just a college student home for the summer, hanging out with my family, texting my friends, living an ordinary life. Yet, ordinary or not, someone had chosen me. My dad was hit hardest by that realization. He sat me down one evening, his voice breaking as he said, "I should have taken it seriously the second your mom pointed out the mistakes on that label." I brushed it off, and that could have cost us everything. I saw tears in his eyes, something rare and raw. "I promise you, Lila, I'll never ignore a warning sign again." Mom didn't need to say anything. Her actions spoke louder than words. Every time she looked at me, I could see both relief and fear in her eyes. She hovered a little more than usual, checking in constantly, but I didn't mind. If anything, it reminded me of how close I had come to being gone, and how her protective instincts had played a part in saving me. As for Ben, he was quieter than normal for a while. He clung to me more, asking to sit in my room at night, too scared to be alone. It broke my heart to see my little brother shaken, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wanted him to know that even in the scariest moments, we could survive. Looking back now, I realized that night taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Danger doesn't always arrive with flashing signs or loud warnings. Sometimes it shows up in the most ordinary places. A trip to the mailbox, a simple cardboard box. And when it does, the difference between safety and tragedy can come down to one small choice. Listening, trusting your instincts, believing the people who care enough to warn you. If Mr. Carter hadn't spoken up, if my mom hadn't pressed Dad to call the police, if I had just laughed and carried that package inside, this story wouldn't have had the same ending. I'm alive today because someone cared enough to stop me, and because I finally chose to listen. That's the lesson I want to share with you. Never ignore your gut, and never dismiss a warning from someone you trust. It might feel inconvenient or unnecessary in the moment, but it could save your life. So I'll ask you, what would you have done if someone told you not to open your package? Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you thinking long after they end.